Do your patients report that they have good days with their pain or fatigue, followed by a series of bad days or flare-up? This is known as the boom-bust or over-under activity cycle, and usually happens when people overdo things on a good day, or they push through their pain or fatigue to make up for lost time during flare-ups. Unfortunately, this is not a sustainable way of managing their condition over time, and usually leads to a decline in function and activity in the long term. Therefore, in this video, I'll let you know the 3 top activity management hacks to help your patients manage their pain and fatigue. Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Mahin and I'm an advanced physiotherapist specialising in pain management based in the UK. On this channel, we explore lifestyle strategies and tools to help people manage pain and create healthier and happier lives. Today, I'll be talking about the 3 Ps that help overcome the boom-bust cycle to manage pain and fatigue. So let's get into it. So in this video, I'm going to mainly be using examples of how the boom-bust cycle and the 3 Ps relate to pain. However, this can also be applied to things like fatigue, stress, productivity, and work. So even though you might be watching this video to help stop your patients from going through the boom-bust cycle, you may also find that it relates to your own life and you might be able to use some of these concepts as well. But to start, what actually is the boom-bust cycle? So let's just ignore for a second that my lines aren't really straight and drawing clearly isn't one of my strengths. But what you can see here is that we have activity, which is on the y-axis, and we have time on the x-axis. So initially what we see is an increase in activity levels. And let's say this might be because someone is experiencing a good day, so their pain's not too bad that day. So what they try to do is they try to catch up on certain activities and, make up for those bad days. So it might be that they have an increase in doing the housework or cooking or gardening or, going out to do the shopping. They might try and pack a lot of activity into a good day to make the most of it. So we see an increase in the activity levels here. It may also be that someone is consciously actually increasing their activity levels. So they're trying to maybe increase their fitness, so they're doing a little bit more walking, or they're returning to a sport maybe that they perhaps haven't done for a while. Okay. It might even be that someone's got exams coming up, so they're cramming all of their revision in, and that leads to an increase in activity levels then. So, as I mentioned, what we see activity levels rise up here. Oh God, that is a very, very wonky arrow. And then because of this sudden increase in activity, we see a sudden drop in activity levels there. And that's because there's been an increase in pain or fatigue. So we've got an increase here in the symptoms, which has meant that there's a reduction here in activity. As humans, we believe that if we just push through something, we will get to our goal a lot quicker. And this is reinforced with messages such as work hard, don't be lazy, put in the work now. And when it comes to actually managing pain and fatigue, this just isn't true, and it's just not a sustainable way of managing activity over time, as we're going to find out in a moment. Using pain as an example, the harder that we push into pain, the harder pain pushes back. So this is why we see a sudden drop in activity levels following a period of increased activity, because there's this massive increase in pain and fatigue. We then, after the good day, have a bad day or a few bad days in a row, and this is where patients may tell you that they needed a few days to recover so that their pain settled down again, and they might have said that, I overdid things the next day, it was very painful and I need to recover for that. And after this period of rest, what we see again is activity levels slowly start to rise again, and then again we might have a good day, because after a few days of rest we might have a good day. And then because patients have a good day, again, they try to make up for the bad days by cramming in loads of activity again. They do the housework once again, they go out to see their friends that they've had to cancel on during the bad days. And suddenly those activity levels go up again. And then of course we see the activity levels come down again because there's an increase in pain and fatigue and whatever those symptoms might be. So just to sum up this cycle then, what we have sudden increases in activity, okay, maybe on a good day, which is followed by sudden decreases in activity in response to pain or fatigue. And this is why it's called the boom-bust cycle. We have booms in activity, followed by busts in activity because of the increase in symptoms. And what we can also see from the graph here is that there's a general trend here of decreasing activity levels over time, okay? And this is because of decreased activity, but also because of decreased function, because this boom-bust cycle is just not a sustainable way of managing activity in the long term. And this is why managing pain and fatigue through activity is such a challenge, because we don't want to encourage patients to rest too much or avoid activities, because the more that they avoid something, the more difficult it becomes, because there's a reduction in physical capacity and function and strength. But also, we don't want to encourage patients to just keep pushing through the activity, because the harder that we push through, the harder the symptoms push back, and then we get this boom-bust cycle that's going on, which just isn't sustainable in the long term. Therefore, we need to help patients find a suitable balance so that they can sustain their activity levels over time, and this is where the 3Ps come in. To help patients manage their activity over time, it's really important that we explore the 3Ps with them. And the 3Ps stand for pacing, planning, and prioritizing. So let's talk about pacing first. So pacing is when you take an activity and you break it up into manageable chunks with periods of rest in between. I'm going to give an example now of how we can use pacing. So let's take an activity. Let's take cleaning the house because it's a nice easy one to think about. So when a patient cleans the house, this is their level of activity. So that red line represents doing all of the housework all in one go, top and bottom, all the rooms. Now what pacing would suggest is that we break that whole activity up into manageable chunks. So here what we might do is break that pacing up into, let's say, 4 chunks. So that's broken up into 4 chunks. So what that might mean is that a patient does the downstairs over 2 days and the upstairs over 2 days, okay? The other important thing to do is to add periods of rest in between. Now, for some patients, that might mean that it's rest in the form of, a day's rest. So you're actually doing these chunks over different days. Or it might be that actually they do a chunk of activity, then they have a half an hour or hour's break to rest before going back to another activity, rather than keep pushing through and having to stop when the pain stops then. And we call this concept chunking. So to know how much to do for each chunk, it's really important that we help patients discover their baseline. And a baseline is a level of activity that your patient can do without experiencing significant pain or fatigue after that. It's helpful to tell your patients that they should feel like they could probably do a little bit more after doing each chunk, but they're not going to initially, okay? A key concept of pacing is stopping before the pain stops you. So it's really important that you relay that to your patients. This can of course be difficult because it isn't the pain that's felt during the activity. It's actually sometimes the patients report feeling more pain after the activity, whether that's later that day or the next day. And this is why it's so important that we ask patients to stop even feeling like they can do a little bit more, so that you can almost assess how they feel after the activity, and then they can increase or decrease as necessary. If we are just continuing with the activity, then we're going to get increased pain after. It's better actually to go lower, okay, and actually assess how they feel the next day. And if they feel okay, then maybe they might want to increase the size of that chunk. But it's better to do it that way than going in too hard and experiencing big flare-ups after. Another reason that this can be hard is because for most of us, when we start an activity, we just want to continue until that activity is done so we can tick it off and move on to the next one or put it out of our mind. And the other thing that patients often find difficult with pacing is actually they feel that it takes them longer to do an activity. So here we can see that actually it might be taking 4 days or 4 half days to clean the house, rather than before they try to do it all in one day, and they might feel like, okay, well that's just taking too long. But the important thing to make them aware of is actually, okay, fine, it might take a little bit longer. So let's use an example of maybe 4 days that you're doing the cleaning over. But what's not happening is you're not losing days because of the severe setbacks and flare-ups because you're overdoing an activity. And also it might be that actually on those other days that they are doing the cleaning, it's not just cleaning they're doing on those days, but they're doing other forms of activity in that day that may be not as strenuous or not using their body in the same way. So that's really important because over time they'll have an even level of activity, which means they can do more and they aren't having that decreasing level of function over time like we saw on the graph. Over time, patients can look to increase the size of their chunks. So using this example, rather than breaking up the housework into 4 chunks, it might be that over time they're able to do it all in 3 chunks, okay? But it's more important, as I mentioned, to start off slow and build up over time rather than, going in too hard, leading to a flare-up and then not discovering what their baseline is. So now let's talk about the second P, which is planning. The first and obvious important point about planning is to be able to actually write down a plan for the week as a whole and then breaking that up into a day-to-day plan. Now, this is not just important for pain and fatigue management, but this is actually just a really good skill to use in life generally to make sure that we're always moving towards our goals with minimal distraction and making sure that we're staying on track. The second point is focusing on a few things in the day rather than many. Now, obviously, we've talked about this already, but focusing on too many things can lead to the boom-bust cycle. But also when we're actually planning too many things to do in our day, it can actually leave us feeling underwhelmed and almost like we've failed a day if we haven't completed all of those things. As humans, our mind will always focus on the negative. So at the end of the day, even if you've done 9 out of your 10 tasks, our minds naturally will focus on the one task we didn't complete, making it feel like, that day wasn't a success. but actually we might have completed 9 out of 10 things, which is pretty good. So it's important to actually just focus on a few things and do those things well, and rather than focusing on many things that lead to booming and busting, but also lead to that negative feeling at the end of the day. To know what to cover in the day, I'm going to talk about prioritizing in a second. Third point is keeping it flexible. Now, let's say that a patient's friend calls up one day and they want to go out for coffee with them, and that's really important to your patient because they've not seen that friend in a long time, and they're a really good source of support. Although planning is important, what we don't want for patients to do is be limited by their plan. So it's important to keep things flexible. So something from the plan might need to give or might need to be pushed back into the week so that they're able to go and see their friend. And it means that then they're not trying to see their friend plus doing everything else that's already in the plan, which might lead to them busting. So the fourth point is planning for important events or days out, and also for adaptations. So if I use an example of, somebody wants to go to a wedding on a Saturday. Now, initially what that might look like is, okay, that is the important event for the week, that going to that wedding on Saturday. So it would mean that maybe Friday is a more restful day and the Sunday is a more restful day. Packing in rest around the important activities is so important so that patients are in the best position possible to have most of their energy and less pain on the day of the event. There's also then the adaptations during the event, and this might require a bit of forward thinking. So it might be things like, getting an aisle seat at the wedding so that the patient can get up and move around and stretch their legs so they're not sitting for too long. It might mean that they may need to plan with aids a little bit better. Are they able to walk the distance? Calling up to find out what it might look like on the day. So planning the week as a whole, but then on the specific day, what's going to happen as well. Now, this is important because we can't control everything, but those things that we can control, we can have an influence over it. So it's important to get patients to think about that so that they're setting their day up well for the best day possible. And lastly, as I mentioned before, it's really important to plan in rest into the week so that you're not just filling things with activity. There is some downtime, there is some self-care time and so on. So then we come on to the final P, which is prioritizing. I've previously done a video on values and helping patients find what's meaningful to them, so I'll leave a link to that video in the description below. But with prioritizing, the first thing to do is to ask the patient what are the tasks or activities that are most important to them. And this might be, for example, they really, have a strong family connection and spending time with family is so important to them. So anything that involves spending time with family would come over other things that are less important, like maybe cleaning the toilet, for example. Some people might find that's really important to them and meaningful. Most people would probably pick spending time with others over cleaning the toilet. So yeah, it's just finding out what is important to them so that actually they are packing the week with things that are important to them first, before packing the week with stuff that's less important to them. If people and this is generally, for everyone, again, not just for people with chronic pain, but if people fill their time with things that are not important to them, then there's no room left for the things that really matter. Instead, if we look at the week as a whole and putting the important things first, then the other stuff can fit in around that. So visit tasks in order of importance. Tell patients that if they're spending all of their time and energy on things that don't matter to them, they won't have enough time and energy for the things that do matter to them. So let's start off with those things that matter. And an easy way to help patients prioritize their activities is by using must, should, and could. So must is the things that are absolutely of most importance to them. So let's say their family's going to the park for a picnic on Saturday, so that is an absolute must, so that goes in first. Should then might be they really value doing yoga daily, that helps them to loosen up their bodies and just helps them manage things better in the day. And that's also important, so that might come as a should. And then could is anything else. So anything else that could probably wait, isn't that much of time importance, or isn't something that brings them massive joy, might be just some life admin stuff or cleaning the house again, or whatever it might be. These are all specific individually to your patient, so it's important to have these discussions because no two patients will be the same with this. At the beginning of this video, we saw how the boom-bust cycle leads to a gradual reduction in function and activity over time. By using the 3 Ps in this video and doing little and often with periods of rest in between, we can help patients discover a more sustainable way of managing their activity levels as it becomes more consistent over time. Hopefully you and your patients find that their bad days become less severe and less frequent, and once this is the case, then you can help them to gradually increase the size of those chunks over time by adding new activities in or lengthening the amount of time that they're doing activity for. For more on how to do this and help your patients move towards their meaningful goals, check out this next video here. Thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you next week.